In this video, we will show you how to replace your AC compressor kit on this Honda Civic. This will be located under your hood, underneath your alternator. Let's get into it. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. The first thing that we need to mention is that your AC system is pressurized with Freon. You want to make sure you have a professional evacuate that AC system for you. They would do that with these two ports. You never want to do this on your own and evacuate it out into the atmosphere. On the battery, you'll find that you have a 10mm nut holding the cable in place. Let's loosen this just enough that we can remove the cable from the battery itself. Now we can start taking off the belt, but before you do, you want to make sure you take note of that belt routing. So when we go to put the belt back on, it'll be in the exact same route. Now we can make our way over towards the passenger side of the engine. We're going to remove the serpentine belt from along the alternator pulley. Use a 19mm wrench right on this area of the tensioner. We're going to have to apply pressure counterclockwise here, pushing it towards the rear of the vehicle. That will release tension. Now we can take that belt and slide it right out of place. Remove your tool from the area. Now we can start disconnecting the wiring along the top of the alternator. We'll start with the wiring for the AC compressor. It comes right along this area. To do this, you can use a small pocket screwdriver or a pick. Up along this area, there's a small squeeze tab. You can squeeze that in either by finger or just get underneath this tab and gently pry it up. You don't want to break it because we do need this to lock back in position when we go to reinstall it. Every time you disconnect an electrical connector, take a peek. If you see any funny colors, that's corrosion and it would need to be dealt with. Let's make our way to the other side of this bracket, and you'll find that there's a 10mm headed bolt holding the bracket to the alternator. Let's get that bolt out of there and remove the wiring. Now we can pull this out of place. We'll give it a quick inspection. Now looking along this bracket, you can tell that there is two wire connectors that come right down along this area. Those are to hold the wire steady. Ours are broken. But typically, you would just want to make your way inside of this area and gently pry them out of place. We'll continue removing the wiring. We have a rubber protective boot over this connector. Just gently pry that out of place. In this area, there's a small squeeze tab. Once again, we'll squeeze that in and disconnect this. Quick check. Move along to your next wiring harness directly underneath this boot. To remove this, we'll be using a 10mm. Take hold of that wire, we'll lift it up and off of there. Check it for corrosion on both sides. You want to make sure that's nice and clean. Now we can take this wiring and just put it aside. We have this bracket mounted directly to the alternator. Use your 10mm to remove it. At this point, to continue removing the alternator, you'll find that you have two 12mm headed bolts holding it in place. One's up along the top, out in the open. The other one will be directly underneath this pulley. It's a little harder to get to. I like to start with the hardest one to get to. Make my way down here with my 12mm. We'll remove that mounting bolt, and then we'll do the same to the top mounting bolt. Let's move up to that upper mounting bolt. Keep in mind, this is the last thing holding the alternator in place. It does have a metal bushing that will hold pressure and temporarily hold it in place, so you don't necessarily have to worry about it falling out. We will have to gently pry it out of place. Now we'll carefully use a pry bar in between the alternator and this bracket and gently pry this out of place. While you're doing so, be extremely careful that the alternator does not fall and potentially damage anything. Now that we have the alternator out of there, you want to pay attention to where that upper mounting bolt went through. This is a bushing that you can gently press back outward, away towards the back of the alternator. The reason why you want to do this is because the bracket will have to slide through here, and this is supposed to hold tight. So we want to make sure it's nice and loose for during the installation process. We'll use some penetrant, a hammer and a punch, and we'll just push this through, just a tiny bit. You don't need to push it all the way out. Now let's move along to removing this plastic trim panel that comes along the top. To remove this, you'll find that you have 4 push clips holding it in place, 1 on each side, and 1 making its way towards the center on each side. The look of your push clips can vary, depends on if they've been replaced before. Generally for them, you can either lift up on the outer portion if it's a single, or if it's a double piece, you would want to pull up on the center to unlock it, and then remove the outer portion as well. Now we'll take hold of this, pull it aside, grab onto that, start lifting it up. Do the same on the other side. Now we'll start lifting this up and away. Once you have it separated along the front, you want to make sure you pull it straight forward so it comes out along that hood latch. Now let's make our way underneath this area. We're going to remove the passenger side fan. To remove that, we'll start with the wiring. In the center here, you have a small tab. You can carefully press this in. Pull this out of place. Quick inspection. Follow that wiring to its mounting point along the top of the fan. Use a trim tool or a small prying device and pop that out of place. With the wiring out of the way, we'll continue on to our 2 10mm headed mounting bolts right along the top of the fan. Those bolts are holding the fan to the radiator. Now we can take hold of the fan, give it a little wiggle, and lift it straight up and out. While doing so, you want to be extremely careful not to damage the radiator in any way. Now let's start looking down at that AC compressor. You'll find that you have 2 lines that lead to it. You want to make sure that you clean the area. We'll just use a little bit of compressed air to make sure there is no debris. Now we'll continue on to removing each of the lines. We'll continue down here to this 10mm mounting nut. Take hold of the line, give it a wiggle, and lift it up and away from the AC compressor. Now once you have the line off of there, it's important to make sure that you tape the end so no moisture that could be in the air makes its way into your AC system. Now that we've done that line, let's do the exact same thing to the other line. Now we can start removing our 4 mounting bolts. You'll find that you have 2 up along the top, and the other 2 will be located down along the bottom. We'll start with the lower ones. Use my 12mm to loosen this. Now that we have that one out of there, let's continue on to the other lower bolt. Get this on here. Now let's make our way up to our final 2 mounting bolts. As for this last one, you want to make sure you're holding onto that AC compressor. When you're removing it, be extremely careful that you do not damage the fins on your radiator. With the AC compressor out of position, continue on to inspecting each of the mounting areas. So when you put in the brand new compressor, you're sure that there is nothing in the way. Now over on the bench, the next thing that we are going to want to do is take hold of our original AC compressor. We want to make sure that we have a measuring cup of some sort so we can measure exactly how much oil is going to come out of this. This is where the majority of the oil from the refrigerant system in your vehicle should be accumulated in here. The oil that you will be using in the end to be able to fill this would be the PAG oil, PAG46. Now we'll just take this right over the cup, and what you would want to do is try to empty out any fluid as you can from inside of either of these ports. While I have it over the cup, I'll also be spinning it. Commonly there will be fluid that comes out of these ports, and you would want to take a measurement. By not having any oil inside of that compressor, that would tell you that you definitely had an AC problem. Now we've got some oil coming out of this. It doesn't look like it's going to be very much. We'll continue on by spinning the pulley and the clutches at the same time. A lot of times you can force a little bit out. Just try to do this several times. Get out as much as possible. The next thing you want to do is take measurement of exactly how much oil came out of it. 1 ounce, 2 ounce, 3 ounce, 4 ounce. Take note of that and then clean out your measurement cup. Now let's take hold of our brand new compressor. On the compressor, you'll find that it has the 2 ports covered. That's because you don't want any dirt or moisture making its way into this area. What we need to do is use a 10 millimeter to remove each piece of the mounting hardware. We're going to be reusing those plugs for the installation process. Now let's go ahead and put the oil into our measuring cup. At this point, I have 3 full ounces of oil out of that AC compressor. So I'll wash this out one more time, and then we'll add 3 ounces of known good PAG oil into here, and then put it directly into that compressor. Now that I've got my 3 ounces in here, we'll just continue on by putting it right in the center port. Now let's temporarily reinstall our plugs. You don't necessarily need to screw these in. I just kind of put it on like this. In case it does fall off, I can easily put it back on without it falling. All right, let's get ready to install that brand new AC compressor. Along the top, where my fingers are, there's a couple little tabs. And on the vehicle itself, you'll find that you have 2 ears that stick out, one for each side of the bracket. Now I've got my 2 bolts in my hand. We'll carefully bring this and put it down into position. Once again, we're being extremely careful not to drop this. We do not want to damage the radiator or, of course, the brand new compressor. Double check to make sure it's sitting on the ears properly. Now we can start in each one of those mounting bolts. We are not going to tighten any of these until we have every single one of them started in. Now we can get in those lower bolts. Now we can snug these up, and then we'll torque each of them to 16 foot-pounds. Now we can torque these. Now let's pay attention to our lines. Get this off of here. On the end of each one of your lines, you should have an O-ring. We're going to remove that O-ring. You can either use a small pick or a small pocket screwdriver. Now before you dispose of this O-ring, go ahead and take it over to your kit. Find the one that matches up. We'll put the two of those aside. Before we install our brand new O-ring, we're going to clean the line, but we want to be extremely careful not to get anything inside of it. When you're installing these O-rings, you want to make sure you use a little bit of that PAG oil on it. It'll help it slide into place. Now we can take this and put it onto the compressor. You remember that we had left the plug in place for the line itself, so we'll remove the mounting bolt, assuming you did put that in there, and remove the plug. As we put this line in place, be extremely careful not to drop anything into that compressor. Press that down until it's flat and level. Now let's continue on with our mounting bolt. Now we'll bottom out the line, and then we'll torque that bolt to 7.2 foot-pounds. Now let's do the other line. Now we can remove the plug from the AC compressor and put this into position. As we slide it down, you want to be extremely careful for your wiring. We'll just bring that up and out of the way. We'll snug it up and torque that to 7.2 foot-pounds as well. Okay, let's get ready to install our fan. Along the bottom of the fan, you'll find that you have two little tabs that protrude down and out. Those will fit into their corresponding holes down along the bottom there. Let's take this and put it in position. You'll notice that I do have mine lubricated. You can do that as well. Just take a second to align those lower tabs. We'll just double check to make sure that each of them are aligned properly. Now, assuming you have the lower tabs in, you can go ahead and take this and try to twist it a little bit along the bottom. If it does not move, we'll continue on to the two upper mounting bolts. These are those small 10mm headed mounting bolts. Start them in, snug them up. The next thing we'll do is start paying attention to that belt again. I like to temporarily align the belt on each one of the pulleys as it needs to be. Obviously, the alternator is not in place yet, so we won't be able to put it over that pulley. But while we have plenty of space in this area, we might as well just reach down here, grab onto that belt, and make sure it's aligned with every other pulley as close as possible. This part can be a little bit difficult. We want to make sure that we do have the belt in the proper routing. It goes over some pulleys and under others. All right, let's install that alternator. We'll take this and put it in position. Start in each one of the mounting bolts before you snug either of them. Now let's tighten the lower bolt and then the upper. Now that we have these two mounting bolts tight, let's torque them to 17 foot-pounds. Now let's continue on to our wiring. We'll grab the harness that's coming from the AC compressor. We'll connect these two together. Press it in, listen for a click, give it a tug. Continue on to the connector that leads to the top of the alternator. Make sure you press that in and then put the protective boot over it. Time for the wire along the top of the alternator. Slide that right over the stud. With that nut bottomed out, torque it to 6 foot-pounds. We'll protect that as well. Now we just want to make sure that we secure our wiring. There should be those little clips that come along the side here. If yours were broken, you want to replace those, of course, or just use a wire tie of some sort. Now let's get this bracket lined up. Start in that mounting bolt, tighten it up. Now it's time to put the belt back up and onto the alternator. While we're bringing this up, you're going to notice it's under tension. You want to double check to make sure it's around all the pulleys as close as possible. Then we'll be using our 19mm wrench right down here on the tensioner. We'll be twisting this counterclockwise towards the rear of the vehicle to release tension from the area, and then we can slide the belt over as needed. Get our 19mm wrench on here. You can also be using a serpentine belt tool, whatever is best for you. Let's double check to make sure it's on all those pulleys. Assuming that looks good, go ahead and release the tension there. Now that we have the compressor in position, let's continue on to the receiver dryer. Now to do that, we'll be loosening the top of the grill so we can gently pull this away and reach our arms down and behind this area. To do that, you'll find that you have two 5mm Allen head screws holding this in place, one along the driver's side and one on the passenger side in the same area. With the grill pulled back and out of the way, we'll continue on to our AC condenser bracket. Use a 10mm to remove this upper mounting bolt. Now we can take hold of that bracket and we'll pivot it out of the way. You don't have to fully remove that. Up along the top here, you'll find that you have a bracket that goes around that receiver dryer and it's held in place with a 10mm headed bolt. We don't have to remove the bolt, but you do want to make sure it's nice and loose. Now it's nice and loose up along the top here. We're going to make our way all the way down to the bottom of it. Now we can have a look at the bottom of that receiver dryer. You're going to find that you have another 10mm headed bolt. This one goes through the AC condenser and into that receiver dryer. Remove the bolt and then slide the receiver dryer up and out of position. There's that bolt. Now I'll take hold of that receiver dryer, give it a little tug straight up and out of here. If it seems as though it's stuck in the bracket, you can fully remove that upper 10mm headed bolt, remove the bracket at the same time as the receiver dryer, and then we'll just put it all back together. Now once you have this popped free, we'll continue on by lifting it up just a little bit. And now we can pivot this. With it diagonal, we can continue on with sliding this out of the bracket. We'll bring it right straight down. Now we can remove this from the vehicle. Now let's continue on to paying attention to that AC condenser. In the two ports where you had just removed the receiver dryer, you might find that you have an O-ring. Make sure that you remove each of them. Once you have both of those off of there, go ahead and wipe down the area, give it a close inspection, and then we can get ready for our installation. Now we can get ready for our installation. Along the bottom of this, you'll find that you have two O-rings. You want to make sure you lubricate those. For that, we'll be using some of that PAG oil that came with your kit. Make sure down along the bottom here, you pay attention to that bolt hole and have it facing towards the front as we slide this into position. Let's take this and put it into the bracket, and then we'll swing it around and put the bottom in as well. Once you feel as though you have it lined up, go ahead and press it down in as far as you can, making sure that each one of those O-rings is secured and perfectly in place. We'll continue on with our 10mm headed bolt. Start it in, snug it up. Right there is bottomed out. Just make sure that's nice and snug. Once that's snug, torque it to 7.2 foot-pounds, which essentially equates to 86 inch-pounds. It's torqued. Now that we have the bottom torqued, let's make our way up to that upper bracket. For this, we'll just make sure that that 10mm headed bolt is nice and tight and the clamp is holding onto the receiver dryer properly. Let's make our way to that bracket with our 10mm headed bolt. You want to make sure you start this in by hand so you're sure it's not cross-threading into position. Now we can tighten this up. Now we can take that grill and start putting it back in position. We'll start in each of our mounting bolts and then snug them up. Let's get our grill back in position. Start in each of your mounting bolts up along the top here, and then we can snug them up. Make sure that's nice and tight. Now we can put on our forward trim panel. We'll be taking this and sliding it into position, making sure that we take that hood handle and sliding it through the center hole. Now we'll take the front of this and slide it down underneath the grill trim. This part can be a little bit difficult. Let's put in all of our push pins. Now let's make our way up along the passenger side of the engine compartment. We're going to have to disconnect each of these two AC lines. We'll start with the high line, high pressure line, smaller one. Be using a 19mm and a 17mm. Now that we have this one disconnected, we'll be leaving it in place temporarily. Make your way over and do the same thing for this line. For this larger line, we'll be using a 24mm and an 1 1/16 wrench. Move along to removing the bracket for your low side line. We'll use a 10mm. Now we can grab onto this, give it a little wiggle, and start pulling it away. You want to make sure you give that line a quick inspection, and you never want to leave this open for a long period of time, so we'll be taping it shut. It's very important to make sure that you have no moisture inside of your AC system. Now we can pop the high side line out of its bracket. Just grab onto that and lift it up a little bit. Got another one down in here. Just clean and inspect that line real quick, tape it off as well. Now let's pay attention to these lines right across here. You'll find that you have a plastic bracket holding them in place. We'll just pop this so it separates. You can use a small flat blade screwdriver or whatever you need to use. We'll just pop those free from the bracket. Now we can follow those all the way back behind the engine to the firewall. Along this area, you're going to find that you have a 10mm nut. Let's remove that. Once you have that out of the way, we can remove the lines and the stud. Use our magnet to remove that nut so we don't lose it. Now we can grab hold of this, give it a little wiggle, separate it, and remove it. With the lines out of there, let's remove that stud. We'll be continuing by using our 10mm. There's that stud. Quick inspection, set it aside. Now let's make our way into the passenger compartment. Underneath the passenger side dash, you're going to find that you have this black trim panel. To remove this, we'll be taking hold of it and pulling it straight rearward. We'll just give that a quick inspection and we can set that aside. Next, we'll continue on to removing the glove box. This is going to be very easy. Along the bottom, you'll find that you have two 8mm headed screws, one on each side. Now we can open the glove box and carefully remove it from the dash. With the glove box out of the way, we're going to be paying attention to this plastic area of the dash itself. Now what we are going to have to do with this plastic runner that comes across is remove it. You can use a razor blade, a saw, or even a hot cutting knife. Now we can remove this and dispose of it properly. Now we can remove this metal piece. For this, you'll find that you have two 8mm headed bolts, one on either side. Remove the pair and the cross member. Let's start removing this vent area. To do that, you'll find that you have a 10mm bolt up here. We'll remove that. You'll have one 7mm headed bolt right here. Now before we make our way underneath this area, to get the next one, we'll be using some long nose pliers. Let's get the wiring off of here. We'll just squeeze on these two tabs and pull the wiring out the backside. Now we can make our way along the back side of this. Approximately at this height, you'll find another 7mm bolt. That screw out of there. There's that one. Now we can take hold of this piece. We're going to give it a little wiggle, pulling it towards the passenger side and down at the same time. There's that. Quick inspection, set it aside. Now let's pay attention to the wiring harness. We're going to disconnect all of the electrical connectors that make their way across towards the passenger side. We'll start with this green connector, press on the little locking tab, pull it off, and of course give it a quick inspection for corrosion. Follow the wiring harness. You'll find that it leads straight back towards that firewall. There's two connectors there that we will disconnect. Now we can make our way just above that. There's another one up here. In this area, you'll find another green connector. Squeeze the tab and disconnect it. Let's dislodge that from along the top of the box. Now we'll follow this next cable down and underneath the blower motor assembly. As you follow that wire down, you'll find that it does have a mounting point right here. Use a trim tool or a small prying device and pop that out of place. Now we can follow that to where it connects onto the blower motor. For this, there's another little squeeze tab. Go ahead and squeeze that in and disconnect it. Now we can take this entire wiring harness and we'll set it aside. Now we can start using our 10mm to remove all of the mounting hardware that holds the blower motor housing in place. Up along the top of this, you'll find that you have a 10mm nut on one side and another on the other. Let's start with those. Using a 10mm, a swivel, and a long extension. Get this out of here. We'll get that other side. Once again, it's the same thing. It's got a stud, and we're going to be removing that nut. Get that nut out of there. Let's make our way along the driver's side of the box. You'll find that you have two more 10mm headed mounting bolts on this side. Get that one out of there. This one's much lower. There's the other one. All the way down along the bottom, you'll find a 10mm nut. Let's get that out of there. Try not to lose that in the carpet area. Now along the bottom passenger side of the box, you'll have another 10mm headed bolt. Now we can take hold of this. We're going to give it a little wiggle, start pulling it away and down to remove it. Now let's continue on to removing this wiring harness from this area of the plastic box. We'll just use some long nose pliers, grab onto the two ears, one on each side of it, give them a little squeeze, and lift this up and out of position. Take hold of that wire and pull it out of its two mounting points coming across here. Just a slight tug should set that aside. The next thing we'll do is move along to removing several Phillips head screws. Most of them are out in the open. There is one that's located all the way on the back side of this box, closest to the firewall itself. It's extremely hard to get to, but a long Phillips head screwdriver, you should be able to get right in there. Let's start removing all of the screws that we can see. I'll start down along the bottom. Now let's continue up along this area. All the way up along the top, you'll find another Phillips head. And now we'll remove the hidden screw in this area right here. Take hold of that, give it a little wiggle, and remove it. Now we can reach inside here. We're going to grab onto the AC evaporator. That's inside of this box right here. We can do that by taking hold of these two tubes. We'll start pulling them towards the passenger side. Once the evaporator's out of the box, we can remove it from the vehicle and get over to the bench. Careful for that wiring. We'll continue on with removing the sensor wiring from it. That just presses right into place, so you can just grab onto that and carefully remove it. All right, let's get ready to install our brand new AC evaporative core. We'll continue on with this wiring. You want to take these tabs and carefully press them directly into the fins, being extremely careful not to damage them. Get this lined up and slide it down and in. Now we can prepare our brand new O-rings. We'll be using a little bit of the AC PAG oil directly on that O-ring. Make sure it's well lubricated. Slide it right over the line, and we'll do the same exact thing to the other one. Now that we have our O-rings on here, let's continue on with 1 ounce of PAG oil. We'll take this and put it directly into the port. Now we can mount our expansion valve. You want to make sure you have it in the proper direction. Looking at one side, you can tell that you have 3 holes in the center. One is for that mounting bolt. The other 2 are bezeled in a little bit. That's for the heads of these bolts to go directly down and into. Let's make sure that we have this facing in the proper direction. Slide it down into position. Continue on with your 2 mounting bolts. Start these in by hand so you're sure they are not cross-threaded. After that, bottom them out and then torque them to 28.8 inch-pounds. Let's get this back over to the vehicle and get ready for installation. Along the bottom, you should have this plastic tray that just sits right here. We'll take this and put it in position. Carefully slide it in, being extremely careful not to damage any of the fins. Now we can get this wire in place. If you were looking at this box, you'll find a small slotted area for this to line up with. Just take that and press it right in there. Now we can continue on with the cover. We'll be taking this and put it in position. Just slide it right on there. Now we can start in our mounting screws. We have one final screw. That's the one that goes all the way up against the firewall. It's going to be a little bit difficult to get it in there. Just go ahead and put it right on your Phillips head screwdriver and put it in position. Now we can start securing this wire. Just double check to make sure that it is pressed into place properly. Now we can get our blower motor box installed. We have to try to get it aligned with the top studs there, and then we can roll the bottom side in as well. Once you feel as though you have it in the proper placement, continue on with your mounting hardware. Let's get this bottom one in down here to kind of hold this in place for us while we continue. I typically like to leave all of them loose until I have each one of them started, and then I snug them up. With all of the mounting bolts started, we'll continue on with the mounting nuts. Now we can go for each of the top corner mounting nuts. There's that one. Now we'll do the same to the other side, and then we can snug them up. Now that they're all started, let's snug them up. Get this last one down here. Now we can start connecting in our connectors. We'll start with this top green one up here. Press it in, listen for a click. Make our way just below that, a little bit further towards that firewall. We have another connector. Now we'll take this long wire with the green connector, bring it up and over the top of the box, all the way over towards the passenger side, and connect that in as well. This should have several areas along the top of the box you can press this into. Double check to make sure that wire is completely secured all the way across. Now we can connect in our blower motor resistor. And then bring this across and connect in the blower motor. Resecure the wiring down along the bottom. Let's get this piece back in there. We want this area going towards the driver's side. Start in that mounting bolt right up along here. Just like before, we're going to leave this loose and continue on with our other mounting screws. Let's move up here to this mounting screw. We'll use our 7mm to snug this up. Now that I have both of those tight, let's make our way back up here and tighten this 10mm headed mounting bolt. While we're in this area, let's resecure the wiring harness directly into this hole. Slide it through, listen for a click, and double check to make sure it is secured properly in place. All right, now we can put on this crossbeam. When you do it, you want to make sure you have it in the proper positioning. So each one of these rectangular slots are facing down. We'll put this in and behind the brackets of the dashboard itself. Align each of those two mounting holes. Start in your 8mm headed mounting bolts. Now we can get ready to put in our glove box. Along the bottom of this, you have those two tabs that come down. That's the hinged area. We'll be aligning those with the corresponding areas along the bottom of the dash here. To do this, just slide it into place, latch it in up along the top to hold it for us. We'll start in each of our two mounting screws. Now we can put on this lower trim panel. Before we do so, let's have a quick look at this. Along the closest to the passenger seat side, you'll have 3 tabs, one down along the side here, and then a couple down next to the firewall. You want to be paying attention to each of the holes that are on the vehicle. We'll align this and slide it straight forward. Double check to make sure it's secure all the way around. Now let's make our way back under the hood. We'll be continuing on with our mounting stud. Start this in by hand, snug it up, and torque it to 7.2 foot-pounds, which is essentially 86 inch-pounds. Let's install our lines. We want to align each of the tubes with their corresponding holes, and also align that center mounting stud hole. Once you feel as though you have it in position, try pressing it rearward straight towards that firewall. Start on your 10mm headed mounting nut, snug it up, and torque that to 7.2 foot-pounds as well. Now we can remove the tape from our line. We'll replace our O-ring on each one of the lines as well and connect them into their corresponding area. Use our pick to get this off of here. As always, clean down the line and replace it with a brand new O-ring. Make sure that's well lubricated. Let's take that line and slide it into place. Press it in until it bottoms out. We'll start putting this on by hand so we're sure we are not cross-threading it. Now let's put in our mounting bolt for the bracket. Let's take care of the other line. Same thing, remove the tape, remove the O-ring, compare it to the brand new one, install a new O-ring. We got that pressed in as far as we can. We'll continue on with this nut. Let's take this line and slide it down into its corresponding bracket. Double check to make sure both of the lines are secured. Let's follow those lines rearward a little bit. We still have that plastic bracket. You want to make sure the lines are pressed down and into the proper position. And then you can swing the top of that bracket down and lock it in. Let's make our way over to the battery. We'll press that negative battery terminal all the way down onto the battery, as far as possible. Use your 10mm and make sure that nut is nice and tight. Double check the cable to make sure it is secured properly to the battery. Okay friends, we showed you how to install your AC compressor kit. At this point, take your vehicle down to a trained professional and have them recharge your AC system. Once they've done that, test its functionality. Aside from that, thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.